If you are currently leveling up your Django skills with this tutorial, just to let you know, this tutorial is part of a free YouTube playlist, Django Database Structural Testing, where we learn how to set up and utilize PyTest for database structural testing within Django projects. If you like this tutorial and playlist, then also check out our Django Database ORM Mastery course on Udemy. The link to the course and playlist should be found in the video description. A testing plan is a formal document that outlines the strategy for testing a specific software application, system, or in this case, a database. It essentially serves as a roadmap for the testing process, ensuring everyone involved is on the same page about what is being tested, how it will be tested, and what are the expected outcomes. Now, I have to keep reminding myself this is not a course on testing, so I will select components and try and give you some underpinning knowledge which you can potentially build upon if you wanted to go deeper into the testing process. What is important for us now is, before we start actual testing, is to identify what we're actually going to test. This is our database design that we have implemented with Django models. So we're going to need to test these 10 tables. Each table has fields. Each field has different attributes. So this is the structure of our database, our tables that we're going to need to test. From this point onwards, when you download the source code, you will find a new folder called _docs. This is going to include different documentation which is going to be relevant or useful for you to utilize. So for example, you will find commands for different technologies that we use, as well as folders for different aspects of the development process. In this case, if you look at testing and then you open up the markdown file DB structural testing, you will find an overview of all the structural tests that we're now going to perform on the 10 tables that we have already developed. Now, this is just an example of the docs folder. It might not look exactly the same, but you should find a folder called testing and structural testing. There should be a file called DB structural testing. Right, so this is what it looks like. This is the test cases that we're going to develop for each of the 10 tables in our database. So we're going to be building a test to confirm the presence of the table that we're working with or testing. We're going to validate the columns and data types, going to validate and ensure the foreign keys are correctly defined. We're going to verify any nullable or not nullable fields, have a look at and ensure default values are set correctly, the column lengths are set correctly, and we're then going to test any specific constraints that might be required for any fields in the specific table that we're testing. So there we have our test cases identified. Now, that might not represent all the test cases we want to build, but hopefully that's given us a good starting point. And maybe as we work through and introduce deeper content, we'll go ahead and revisit these tests at a later point. Okay, in respects to expected outcomes, of course, we should know what the expected outcome of the test should be before we actually build the test. Otherwise, we're not going to be building the correct test. In this case, it should be fairly straightforward. Each test case should successfully validate the targeted structural element of the database. Now, you might like to document or extend this document to include the expected outcomes. I won't do that in this case. I think it is fairly straightforward. We are testing for something specific, and that should exist or not exist. As we move through the test, that will become a lot clearer if it isn't already. Okay, so that's the test cases identified and the expected outcomes. So talking a little bit about the testing environment. Now, there isn't really necessarily anything here that we have to set up at this point. We are going to be installing PyTest next, the PyTest testing framework. We'll utilize that to actually build and run tests. So structural testing is typically performed on a separate non-production database environment to avoid impacting any live data. This ensures the testing process doesn't interfere with ongoing database operations. Now, at this point, we are just testing our Django models, not the database. So we don't need to set up a non-production database environment just yet, but I will take you through that process as and when we start structural testing our database. And then just finally, we won't be necessarily creating too much documentation here, but just as a general note, creating documentation is a good way of creating a comprehensive testing setup. It ensures a well-organized and efficient testing process. It fosters clear communication between developers, testers, and maybe any stakeholders. And this all leads to a more robust and reliable database system.